So why are these interactions even important? In the policy arena, most discussions about coherence and interlinkages in the 2030 agenda have focused on the existence of trade-offs and synergies between sectors and the need to map them out and identify ways to alleviate or remove trade-offs and maximize synergies. So in the coming slides, we will see what are these trade-offs and what are these synergies. These are actually to measure like a factors in the overall interactions of like a targets in the whole set of like SDGs, right? So somewhere like we saw in the previously in this like slides, like how like these relationships sometimes they are going in the negative, up to like -3 level, -2 level, -1 level, plus minus 0 0 level, plus 1 level, plus 2 level, and plus 3 level. So these are the three like a different like a types of like interrelationships. Here it is in the positive side up to the very high degree, here it is negative side is a very like a low degree, right, and so on. So there are 7 at the scale of like these 7 like like these labels, right? So in this ones you can say ki here like things are working out very nice, and like one initiative is supporting to the another very directly, and it is so kind of an intertwined that it is like kind of indivisible, like the aims and objectives they are indivisible and they are working in a total sync. Okay, so these actually ranges we call it like things are working in synergy, right? So things are working as per planned and as like intended in the positive direction, right? And here it is a kind of like a negotiation. Okay, so that is that trade-off you have to make, like the examples we saw, like how for like keeping a national reserve but allowing like some access like to that place for tourism or recreational or maybe other like a research or maybe some sort of like activities. Okay, so that's a small like a negotiation you need to like make with the first variable in order to facilitate the second one, right? So that's like a trade-off. So all of those like such relations they fall under like this trade-off category, right? So these are the two major like distinctions you will see in these points, right, in the coming slides in these interrelationships. However, this area currently has a weak conceptual and scientific underpinning and no common framework to analyze the nature and strengths of these interactions and the extent to which they constrain or enable policy and action. Indeed, there is a need to develop guidance and tools that can help policymakers and investors identify and manage synergies and trade-offs across goals and targets. Before the stage of policy formulation, including the setting of context-specific, such as national or local, targets and indicators, research needs to be conducted into the nature and dynamics of the interactions. Below, we introduce a more refined typology of interactions for use in empirical research into SDG interactions. Such research needs to be developed to provide a usable knowledge base for both policy level decision support and the design of implementation strategies. So why these like two things are like essential to understand like the nature of like interactions is because of like this you will be in a position to take a like a practical call, like what to do in what kind of circumstances and how to go about it, right? So you see like in this description it helps you like understand this whole dynamics of like a targets, how it is happening, because sometimes these implementations they actually vary from place to place. In one country it may be having like some like a nature of work, in another country there may be the nature of work, the nature of implementation may differ. Okay, so how this whole dynamics is going to take place, that actually we get to know from these synergies and trade-offs, and accordingly we actually frame our policies and implementation strategies, right? So it is an essential like understanding for implementation of like SDGs in places. And this is the reason it is it is like essential to like understand like these interactions. So now we will see, like some key dimensions that shape the interactions. Here we identify a number of dimensions that can be used to contextualize the assessment of specific synergies and trade-offs in case study research. The purpose is to describe the principal ways in which a specific empirical case is shaped by the case-specific features. These should be applied in the case study analysis and discussions. So in this one, the first we see about geographical context dependency. Some relationships are generic and others are highly context dependent. For example, the trade-off between bioenergy and food production, which is gaining significant attention in EU policy making, is not commonly understood as an issue in the Nordic region. On the contrary, farmers and foresters have benefited from the diversification of markets because this has made their supply chains less vulnerable as a whole. However, such context-dependent relationships can have significant spillover effects given the international trade patterns. Hence, even if bioenergy in the Nordic countries is not considered to affect food security there, a joint change in their food export patterns to support national bioenergy production could still have an impact on food security globally. So if you see, this example is taken, like from this place, like a EU policy making, a trade-off, happening between bioenergy and food production. Okay, so that means there is some, like a form of, like a negative interrelationship between these two. Okay, and on the contra, but it's commonly not understood to as an issue in the Nordic region. So interestingly, if you see, this is not having the, like a similar kind of impact, perhaps in the Nordic region, and that is why it is not an issue, but it is a kind of an issue in the EU policy making in the EU, and like they are talking about it, they are discussing about it, they are working about it. Okay, so you see like how the nature of like some of these interactions may vary, from place to place, like previously just we like I saw, and this is one example, right? Yeah, so however, such context dependent relationships have significant spillover effects giving the international trade patterns. Yeah, so this is where like internationally it takes a shape, and makes or gives you a pattern, like what are the places where like a synergy is happening among what sectors, among what SDGs, among what like targets, and on the same line which are the places where like this trade-off like a pattern is happening among SDGs, among like targets, among like goals, right? Hence, even if bioenergy in the Nordic countries is not considered to affect food security there, a joint change in their food export pattern to support national bioenergy production could still have an impact on food security globally. Okay, so still there may be like some form of interaction, some form of like a negative like an impact that is mentioned over here. Okay, if it goes at global level, right? So for food security, so this is the mention, even if it is not of like that much of extent, or it's not in negative side. Okay, it's not in the trade-off like a zone, but still it can have like some impact if we calculate it with the food security at global level, right? So this is one actually geographical like a context based like a dependency, location based like a place based like a dependency, like how the like the same like a very set of variables can have positive and negative impacts in different like places. Next we have a governance dependency. In some cases, the negative nature of a relationship can be the result of the poor governance. For example, bioenergy production has been associated with livelihood destruction where commercial plantations have taken over lands used by local communities without consultation or compensation, and with the exclusion of those communities from the work opportunities. Okay, so you can see like in some places like units for bioenergy production they have taken away the lands. Of course, for any like a such initiative you need like a land as a like a very first a resource. Okay, so but in the EAC aspects we have seen like for any like a such like a initiative, what are the consideration for like a social sustainability, right? How the people who have been living there at that place from before like the initiation of that project, how are they going to get affected? Okay, and what are the positive and negative impacts they are going to experience, and how this negative impacts can be compensated by like a more and more like a positive kind of like initiatives and things. So the mention here given is these people they were not even compensated properly, and they were not even given like a work opportunities in those units. Okay, so bringing like a huge like a pile of like a negative impact on them. So of course it's a kind of issue of governance. Okay, why there is no like a policy to safeguard like the interest of like those people, right, and the local people. Okay, so this is the like a government a governance related like a dependency. We can refer to this as a non-genuine trade-off, since the trade-off is not intrinsic to bioenergy production but comes from the manner in which it is governed. Yeah. So if you see, bioenergy production in itself is not going to have like an impact of a negative nature on the society, but how it is being managed, how it is being like a like a organized over there, like that process actually is having like some issues, some flaws, okay, which needs to be kind of addressed. So definitely it's a process like a based as a governance like a based like issue, which definitely can be like a solved by proper like action points. Negative impacts on local communities are more likely to occur or tend to be larger when institutions and rights are weak. Yeah. So very essential, very interesting and like a point over here for everyone, for the whole society at large. Ki for like a proper safeguarding of your rights, proper safeguarding of your own interests, for that you need like a proper institutions, like rules, regulations, policies in place, like a law and order, maybe constitutionary provisions, like regulatory provisions to keep a check in such like unusual situations if they might like occur sometime in future, right? So beforehand itself like the society needs to be kind of prepared to take care of like such eventualities, right? So governance like a related like a dependency, which becomes a key like a shaping agent for like interactions. It can go into the plus dimension, it can take you even in the negative dimension, right? So one needs to have like a proper check of like a properly like those clauses and those frameworks which are people centric, which are society centric, which are place centric. Moving on. Now we are at the level of technology dependency. So let's see how technology plays an important role in shaping like those interactions of SDGs and targets and action points. In some cases there is a real trade-off, but there are technologies that when deployed will significantly mitigate these trade-offs and even remove them. One example is personal motorized transport, which conflicts with climate change mitigation today, while the transition towards zero emission cars fueled by renewable electricity can be expected to remove this trade-off. The degree to which an interaction is governance and or technology dependent determines the solution space that will enable a shift from a negative to a more positive interaction, moving up the scale. Or in the other direction, if changes in governance and technology choices lead to new unintended consequences. Okay, so very interestingly, like a put up over here, if you like a see, like personal motorized transport, like personal cars or personal like two wheelers, like a four wheelers or like SUVs and stuff. Okay, definitely they help like a lot at personal level, at the family level, at household level, to your facility, to your ease of access, to the ease of transport. But it's a direct like a contributor to the climate change like a phenomena also, right? So if we take care of if this vehicle is like a hydrocarbon based or like a conventional fuel based, of course like ICT vehicles and things, okay, so of course it's going to give like a lot of like a emission, right, a lot of impact. So if we deal with the technology and make these vehicles, like a based on like a clean energy, definitely both will be a win-win situation. One can have a personalized, like a motor transport solution, as well as will have very little or almost like a nil, like an impact on the like a climate change. Okay, so it's a technology dependent, like a like a interaction, a key interaction, okay, which is going to shape, like a this like a thing, right? So we need, like a improvement, we need investment in technology to improve on, like these like emissions, in order to facilitate, like some of such like concerns which talk about personalized motorized, like a solution, transport solutions, right? So very apt example. Then we have about reversibility. Certain interactions may be restricted in time to the actual period of intervention. When the intervention ceases, the interaction stops. Other interactions are irreversible or take a very long time to wear out, such that affected systems recover. Irreversible impacts are well known in both land and ocean ecosystems, such as species extinction, collapsed fisheries, or changed states of eutrophication. You know, so yeah, extinction, collapsed fisheries, or changed states of eutrophication. So these processes, if you see, like like some of these are like natural, like processes and things. If you see, like the extent of damages and impacts of what humans, like some of the communities, some countries are causing to the ecosystem. Some of this is reversible because nature has its own like a recovery, like a powers recovery, like a strength. It can recover if you pollute a water body or maybe a river or a pond or something. Okay, after a few years, after like some time, if you allow it to heal, if you do not continuously pollute it, okay, it may go back to its natural, like a state, in some time, maybe subject to like a like a no more, like a pollution, or maybe in like a few years time. But if the impact, if the like a damages are regularly occurring at continuous basis, okay, then the effects may be everlasting and may be irreversible, that you cannot like go back from where you have started, right? So, and some of those examples are extinctions. What if like a particular species is lost because of human intervention? Okay, it cannot be recovered back, it cannot be retrieved back, like in its own original like form and format, right? So that will be a permanent loss which cannot be reversed, right? So this is the like a point we are talking about here, about reversibility. So in some cases it is okay, but in some cases where this like reversibility is not possible, okay, we must be very careful, extremely careful, to not to cause any like more damages or any more like harms in those like circumstances, right? So this is about reversibility. Time sensitivity. So let's see. Certain interactions play out in real time, whereas others show significant time lags. For example, increases in fertilizer use will help to alleviate hunger today, but over application could reduce our ability to produce food for future generations, right? Uses of fertilizer. Similarly, harvesting remaining fishing grounds can have important food security, nutrition and poverty alleviation benefits in the short term, possibly through 2030, but can have longer term adverse impacts on SDG 14 and several other goals such as food security declines. So if you see with the like a time, what is important and what is kind of like essential for food security, for like a feeding everyone, every member of the society, and what like repercussions it may have. Okay, so one of the like best examples from our own country and many other countries is the extensive use of fertilizers and pesticides, insecticides in the agriculture industry, right? So agriculture is so dependent on like these things, like particularly like fertilizers, right? So the green revolution we see, right, happened several decades like back in India, and at that time India was largely dependent on like a food imports, and this is the one phenomena which gave like a strength to India for its own, like standing on its own and securing its own like like a food reserves, and going totally independent from procuring any like a basic food items from outside, right? And it was able to solve like this food crisis which was going on at in our country, right? But there are some repercussions. The extensive use of fertilizer actually led to to several situations such as like a soil degradation, right? And pollution, right? And diseases and many other kind of like a things which happen to like a people from those areas, respiratory diseases, like a skin related conditions, and in some cases like a people like relate to even carcinogenic like a phenomena also from extensive use of fertilizers, right, in agriculture. So it's a kind of you see, it's a very time sensitive kind of thing. What was needed at what point of time at to the most, okay, accordingly you take your call. So if you are so much into the necessity of food security, for example like some countries from third world, definitely you may not actually want to focus more on the like repercussions of using fertilizer, but you want to secure like a food supplies at the first hand, right? So it is a time sensitive distance. Once like that like a objective is kind of stabilized, you can go back and revise or maybe improve on the impacts of like a fertilizer on the food production in like a processes. Okay, so it's a time specific kind of thing. What was needed at like some point of time may not be needed in the same proportion, in the same extent, maybe at another time. So like implementation like a details would definitely vary from like a time to time, right, from T to T dash, like what are the like changes which have occurred, and accordingly like a policy and implementation techniques can be revised. Next we have directionality. The interaction between two areas can be unidirectional or bidirectional, and symmetrical or asymmetrical. So we have like these two variables, x and x dash, right? So this may be unidirectional, just one way, or maybe like this way, or maybe bidirectional, both ways. It's like impacts, and it may be symmetrical or it may be asymmetrical also. Maybe like this one is like like having some impact of maybe like a 1 degree, and this one maybe like having an impact of maybe like a 2 degrees, right, higher degrees. Okay, so this is also possible that it may be like symmetrical kind of a proportion, or maybe asymmetrical proportion, maybe one directional on one side, maybe left to right or right to left, or maybe bidirectional both sides. Okay, if there is no relation, then of course there is no need of like this directionality, or those or study those like two variables. Okay, they will be having some like no relation at all. But if there is a relation, or if there is like some kind of impact, some kind of like a change, some kind of interaction, it may happen like a likewise, right? So we will see in detail here next. So about unidirectional, like one way, either this way or either this way. A affects B, but B does not affect A. So this is also possible. Like there's just maybe like A is affecting B, and B does not affect like a totally A, or maybe vice versa. Like a B is affecting A, and like A is not affecting B in any way, right? So that is a unidirectional like a relationship. So here, for example, electricity access is needed for powering clinics and hospitals for the delivery of healthcare services. Very essential. Whereas healthcare services in clinics and hospitals are not needed for providing electricity access, right? So you see, this is just a one way like a like a relationship. Okay, if this is like there is like a proper, regular and uninterrupted power supply, okay, so there will be kind of like a very efficient, one can say, like like a supply of health services, right? This is the stethoscope. Okay, but for the like a clinic and hospitals and healthcare services, it is not essential, they will have like some impact on the electricity, like a distribution, right? So this is, like this has this relationship just in one directional. So I hope you understood with this, like example. About bidirectional, like both ways, A affects B and B affects A also. For example, personal mobility affects climate change mitigation. Greenhouse gas emissions, like more and more personal vehicles, more pollution. Okay, while measures taken to reduce greenhouse gas emissions can restrict personal mobility. In the case of bidirectionality, interactions can be symmetrical, where the impact is similar in type and strength, or more commonly asymmetrical, where A is affecting B more or in different ways than B is affecting A. Across the SDG framework, it is then possible to add causal chains and causal diagrams. For example, a linear causality would be that A, electricity provision, affects B, girls' education, which then affects C, maternal health. Interaction can then occur across multiple goals and targets. A affects B, C, D, etc. etc. And finally, interactions can be circular. Okay, so that there is an indirect feedback loop. A affects B, B affects C, and C affects A. So if there are only two variables, the relation is bound to be only linear, sorry. But if there are more than two variables, A, B and C, okay, A is affecting B, B is affecting C, and in turn it is possible that C may be affecting A. So this forms a loop. Okay, so what goes comes around. Okay, so you can understand this becomes like a cyclic interaction, like a phenomena over here. It may be unidirectional, it may be bidirectional, or it may be like one place it is unidirectional, another place it can be bidirectional, and like a so on. So those variations, those permutation combinations are possible, but interactions can be symmetrical also, for your understanding. The next key dimension here for interactions is strength of interaction and level of uncertainty. An assessment of the relationship should, if possible, include an assessment of the uncertainty and the strength of the interaction using a simple ordinal scale. So you can understand, it's very, like easy to understand over here. It's nothing complicated. Sometimes, like a strength of interaction, like what degree of, like a strength that interaction is actually having, and the level of uncertainty, like how possible, how often it is possible, like that interaction is going to occur or may not occur, or occur to what extent, and so on. So based on that, like interactions also may actually change or deviate. So now we have come to the like this part where we are seeing this coherence science policy interface for policy coherence on SDGs implementation. So how these like SDGs are getting implemented. Okay, so there are some monitoring implementation policies which actually help doing gap analysis, which helps establishing interlinkages, like synergies and trade-offs, co-benefits and trade-offs, which gives like inputs to integrated assessment. And again from here it gives its feedback loop, and it shapes the previous stages also. Okay, and you see this like interaction is like a bidirectional, right here. Plus this also they have like this special direct relationship also between these like layers. From here we are going on the right side about setting policy priorities, implementation slash budget decision and allocation. Okay, so they also are having this bidirectional like a relationship with like these set of like stages, or at the top directly with the monitoring implementation policies. So we will see some examples of synergies and trade-offs over here with some illustrations. So here there is one observation for observed in synergies and trade-offs within an SDG. So you can see like this is the like a zone where it will be plus minus 0 0 level, and here we are in the plus one side, here we are in the minus one side, right? And then the whole range in between with the a segment at plus 0.6 like interval, and on the left side at minus 0.6 like interval, right? So dividing almost like this like a band into like a three equal parts. The color bars represent the shares of synergies shown by green. So this is this synergies shown by green, non-classified in yellow, and trade-offs in orange. This observed within a goal for the entire data set. The gray bar depicts insufficient data for the analysis, like here the 14 and 16. Okay, there is no sufficient data available. The areas of the circle in the boxes indicate the number of data pairs. You see this column, see the lesson for comparison. The SDGs are represented with the numbers in the left, these numbers, and the icons on the right side. These are the icons. Within each goal, the positive correlations largely outweigh the negative ones. However, negative correlations and non-classifieds are also observed within all SDGs. So if you see, mostly like these like SDGs are working in sync, okay, in synergy, and that's why we see like a major share of greens in all of these SDGs, okay. But interestingly, if you see, yellow is also available, yellow is also present in most of like these SDGs, except two places, 10th and 12th. These yellow ones are also there in everyone except 14 and 16, where there is like no data available. Okay, so keeping this aside, this is this like a graphical representation. So accordingly, why this is essential to understand, because you will see a lot of data like books and like papers written on understanding these like synergies and trade-offs. And why is it essential? That we have seen it earlier. For multiple like regions like you need to know objectively to understand what is going on, and what like measures and initiatives can be taken up in future to ward off all like evil impacts. The number of data is shown here. You can see by this number, the biggest like this thing is more than 10 to the power 4. So we'll see some trade-offs and synergy pairs. Global ranking of SDG pairs with high shares of synergies on the left side, and trade-offs on the right side from the top to bottom. SDG 1, no poverty, 3, good health and well-being, and 6, clean water and sanitation dominate the global top 10 pairs with synergies. The global top 10 pairs with trade-offs either consist of SDG 12 or 15. So you can see over here, such comparisons are quite like common to like make some like implementation based like a research work. Global distribution of difference between share of synergies and trade-offs among the SDGs by country in percentage. Green color depicts countries with higher share of synergies than trade-offs. The positive holds for orange color. The darker the color, the higher the difference is. The gray color depicts regions with no data or with less than 100 data pairs. For most countries, positive correlations largely outweigh the negative ones. However, a large trade-off share is also observed in some countries, as indicated by lower differences. For all the countries, the share of non-classifieds is less than 20%. So you can see like green depicts like a higher share of synergies compared to the trade-offs, like previously also we saw in this illustration. If you see on this first column, there are more greens over here. So just to like inform everyone, by top 10 synergies like a pairs, if you see SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, there is a direct like a relationship between SDG 13 on climate action. From first to fourth, quality education. If your kids are educated, there is a very high chance that like they will settle up more comfortably and in a regular at least work or maybe entrepreneurial work. Okay, so there is a direct like a correlation. Next we have 1 and 5, no poverty to gender equality. Okay, in social level, in many societies and places, like gender equality is still an issue. Okay, women are not given with the proper rights, or total rights of like having their own life. Okay, rather their life is kind of a very strangely like a put. It doesn't like a helps. Rather, if there is like a more poverty, more issues on the gender like equality kind of like a situation. Then there is a direct synergy between 1 and 10, no poverty to reduced inequalities. Next we have no poverty to clean water and sanitation. So if the family is not from a well-to-do kind of status, like a wala family, okay, they are going to miss out on like a very basic like essential like a things such as fresh water, potable water, which is very crucial for our bodily engagements. Next we have this direct like a synergy between quality education and reduced inequalities. Next we have about SDG 3rd and 10th. So good health being and reduced inequalities. Next we have no poverty to health and well-being. Okay, if the person doesn't have anything to eat, how it's going to like help maintaining a proper mental and physical health and well-being. Then also we have like this synergy between SDG 3rd and 5th, 3rd and 6th. Okay, the trade-offs where they are not helping but they are having some sort of a negative like interaction of -1, -2, -3 levels. Okay, so that is between SDG 10 and 12, reduced inequalities to responsible consumption and reduction. Because the moment you go for like such an initiative, there will be kind of a panicky situation, and everybody might pose like a pressure on the like a consumption. The next level of trade-offs we are seeing no poverty and responsible consumption. Okay, where there is no supply of anything, how about consumption, right? You need whatever you can afford, right? So responsible consumption and like a protection actually takes a little toll over here. 6th and 12th, 3rd and 12th, 4th and 12th, 10th and 15th, 5th and 12th, 1st to 15th, 2nd to 12th, 4th to 15th. These are actually combinations where like there is a trade-off. So these are the top 10 of a synergy and trade-offs. Here we have global distribution of the difference between the share of synergies and trade-offs among the SDGs by country in percentage. Green color depicts countries with higher share of synergies than trade-offs. The opposite holds for orange color. The darker the color, the higher the difference is. The grey color depicts regions with no data or with less than 100 data pairs. For most countries, positive correlations largely outweigh the negative ones. However, a larger trade-off share is also observed in some countries as indicated by lower differences. For all the countries, the share of non-classifieds is less than 20%. So this is this figure you can see. Okay, and this is this color band, like a color legend. You can see it's coming, from 0, for the level of synergies and trade-offs. So this side we have, about synergy. On this side we have, like a trade-off. Okay, so from 0 to up to 100 on this side, and from on this trade-off side it is just only 0 to -10. Okay, so most of the places, most of the countries across the world, irrespective of which continent they come from, you can see a lot of green shades, different shades, lighter, darker, middle, right? And some of the countries are showing in blank. Russia here, New Zealand here, and so some more, right? Many from Africa, from Middle East, United Kingdom doesn't have. Some of these Nordic countries also, they do not have like this data. So global patterns of synergy and trade-off pairs. Global patterns of synergy and trade-off pairs with corresponding population for the year 2015. Bar plot. The synergy between SDGs 3, we'll see this in the next slide. SDG 3, good health and well-being, and 6, clean water and sanitation, is widely observed among countries with a total population of 2.7 billion. The trade-off between SDG 3 and 12 is largely encountered among countries with a total population of 3.4 billion. The grey color depicts regions with no data or with less than 10 data pairs. So this is what we have here. So you can see. So synergy pairs are like given over here. These are the combos. So good health and well-being, you can see from this like a turquoise like a color, with clean water and sanitation, SDG 3 and 6. Okay, so you will see this here in Canada, in Russia, even China, and several like in African countries, some of this in Latin America also. Then yellow, light yellow, represents good health and well-being with gender equality. So we are joined by United States of America, India, and some of these like Latin American countries, some here in Africa. Japan is also there in this list. Yeah, and this light purple, we have this third one, good health and well-being with quality education. Okay, so Brazil, Mexico, and some European and country, and Indonesia. Then fourth one, we have good health to partnerships for the goal, 17. Okay, depicted by this color. So Australia, New Zealand, England, Norway. Yeah. The next slide talks about synergy and trade-off pairs. So you can see. So the first one, light blue, is majorly there in Asia and Africa, and some in Europe, some here on this coast also, west coast of South America, sorry, and many others. So from this actually color indicator, you can see like these different countries and what kind of synergies and trade-offs like a combination they have. So now we are moving on to the next part, that is SDG structure and order at levels of people, SDG 1 to 10, ecological SDG 11 to 15, and spiritual SDG 16 to 17.